Okay, here we go. I want to welcome everybody to our Cops and Convicts podcast. I am Sean Shepard, your host, and we have a great show lined up for you today. Let me chill this out a little bit. Welcome, fellas. I hope everybody has their microphones turned on. Um, 1 second. Listen, we're live tonight on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I want to remind everybody who's tapping in tonight to subscribe and follow us on those platforms. If there's a subscription bell, especially on YouTube, please tap that for us so that you can help the channel grow. Welcome to my guest. We got a great show lined up today. We have 3 former members of law enforcement, and I want to give you a little brief background on each one of them. We have Daniel Duncan, who spent 20 plus years as a police officer with the Peoria, Illinois Police Department. Husband, father. Suli Ahfook spent 14 years as a San Diego Harbor Police Department officer. Navy veteran, husband, father. And then there's my guy, Alfonso Esquer, former Maricopa County Sheriff Deputy, former DEA Agent, former Marine, husband, father. I call the 3 of you the Trinity, not to be blasphemous, but I'm calling this podcast the Trinity because all 3 of you are men of faith that have accepted Jesus as their Lord, as your Lord and Savior, and hence the name Trinity. So, gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, great to have you. So let's just jump into it. Daniel, I know you're a little bit pressed for time. You spent 20 plus years with the Peoria Police Department in Illinois. And I know a couple of things that have stood out to you in your career and during your time as a member of law enforcement. Let's jump right into a significant event that happened in your life with a kid named Eddie. Talk to me about Eddie, what Eddie meant to you, and what happened to Eddie that you witnessed.
Hey, once again, thanks for having me, Sean. I do got to get on you because you didn't say I was your man like you said, Alfonso. But I'll take it, man. I'll take it.
It takes time to get to that point. It takes a little time. Me and Al have a relationship that you and Al have on a very different level. But maybe after today, we'll get there with one another. But I appreciate you.
No, man. Eddie Russell was what I would say, man, the one moment in my whole entire career where I felt stressed. I always tell people when people talk about their jobs, I'm like, "How you stressed?" I'm like, but that was the one time that I can say in my entire career, man, being investigated by the DOJ, and I know you probably talk about that, but that wasn't even stressful to me. But losing Eddie Russell when he was Eddie, I grew up. Well, he grew up in the church where I grew up at. Good friends with his mother. Man, he was a great young man. This great young man in the church. I remember seeing him run around the church, always smiling. People in the community loved Eddie. He dealt with a mental illness that he was dealing with. I can't remember exactly when it kind of came into tuition, but one day he was accused of robbing a bank that was local to his house. I was actually right in the area. My parents lived in that area as well. Put it over the broadcast that who the suspect was because the one of the female officers that first responded there actually knew who he was off video. She put the information out. Reached out to his mother, told his mother that, hey, you need to come home. They have your house surrounded. They believe your son is in the house. He was allegedly have robbed a bank not too far from the house. Some short time after that, I knew just because of our policy and procedures, I knew the outcome of the situation and what it was going to be, and I knew that wasn't going to be good for Eddie and the whole family and the community, and which it did. In the end, Eddie walked out of the house and lost his life to multiple members of the police department that I worked for at that time.
So, based on policy and procedure, Daniel, why did you know that the outcome was not going to be good for Eddie?
I knew through our training and our lack of training. I know through the training of how we deal with individuals that could possibly be armed. I knew that component of it, and then I knew from our lack of training of dealing with individuals that was dealing with mental illness, and so I knew that the outcome was not going to be favorable for him at that moment.
And there was nothing that you could do about it.
There was nothing in the world that I could do about it.
And at what point in your career were you with the department when this happened?
I was in the latter stages of my career. At that time, I was actually in the whole transformation police officer at that moment. I was working in community service at that time, really trying to do some things outside the bounds that was normally of trying to reach the community at that moment.
So Daniel, you're at the end of your career and you see this. Did you witness this happen?
No, I was actually at that moment. It was really just kind of crazy to even use that type of term to it. I was actually still driving around the community where it was happening at, and I literally was hoping that he would pop up from one of the houses, because had a relationship with the kid. So I knew if I would have seen him and I could have stopped him and be like, "Hey, come here," I could have got on the radio and told everybody. But I knew in my heart knew that what was going to happen. And after driving around in the community for a little bit, went back to the police station. As soon as I pulled into the police station, I heard over the radio shots fired. My father was on the scene when it happened, and he called me up, and his first words was, "Daniel, they killed him. They killed him." And that was the gut punch at that point.
Do you know whether or not, I'm sure you do at this point, did he come out of the house with a weapon, or did he come out of the house with his hands up?
The reports say that he came out of the house with a weapon. I don't know. I wasn't there. I know there was conflicting stories with some people that was there and things that occurred, but I truly don't know the actual facts of what happened. There was no video. There was no body cams. There's no car cameras to be able to say what actually transpired when he walked out of the house. So having that information, I just don't know.
So let me ask you this, Daniel, and I want to ask this of each of you. Daniel, in this particular instance, I know that there was most likely a community uproar. Am I right or wrong?
Yes, at that time it wasn't what we saw like in some of the major cities, but there still was many people that was upset over the shooting.
So to your point, I'm here in LA. Something can happen 2,000 miles away from here, and people will protest, get upset, and lash out at law enforcement. When you all were members of law enforcement, active members of law enforcement, how did it make you feel on a personal level to have community residents lash out at you, although you had nothing to do with what happened? They were lashing out at you because you were yet another person in a police uniform. And any one of you, I want each one of you to answer that question.
I'll go while they're thinking about it. One aspect of me is I had a great relationship at this moment, with a lot of members from my community. So I didn't really say that. I don't believe that I hit the backlash actually personally myself, but I would tell you mentally, whenever there's type of uproars like this, I would say personally, it's always deep to me because in back of my mind, I always would be saying it's going to go back to normal. Like, like we can protest, we can put policies, procedures, and this and that. Like, man, this thing is so deep rooted. I'm like, I always know it's going to go back slowly but surely, as we still seen today. I'll debate that with anybody. Law enforcement is still the same. From George Floyd and everything that was done after George Floyd, it's still the same. There may be different policies that we actually have, but the deep rootedness of it hasn't changed.
Wow.
Al, how did you handle those situations personally when community residents were lashing out at law enforcement and may have lashed out at you?
Sure. Thank you. Great question, Sean. And I'm going to answer this giving a little bit more insight from a very honest and kind of just a raw perspective. Well, on that word perspective, I truly appreciate what Game Changer does in focusing their research on perspective and law enforcement community perspectives. And that's, I think, where I'll share from. The culture that I experienced in law enforcement was that the perspective was more of a us against them type of environment. As in, if law enforcement was being accused of doing something wrong within the community that caused then an uproar or some type of protest. And I experienced that where there was plenty of protests around our buildings at times for just different actions, enforcement actions that we had taken that did not satisfy the community. So when that would happen, the typical culture within our building and in the law enforcement that members that I worked with and in those that we partnered with, I worked for a federal agency. So then we had our local counterparts that would then support us if the demonstrations were big in size, because the federal components did not have the infrastructure that the local police departments had. So we would join with the local police departments and then the federal officers. The general culture that I observed was that it was a us against them type of mentality. And we would not recognize, when I say we, it's in communication with my members, law enforcement members that I worked alongside, would not take responsibility for those actions, even if they were wrong committed by law enforcement. And the typical perspective that the law enforcement community, from my experience, was that they were in the wrong and that they needed to comply. And whatever we did, whatever law enforcement did, we were in the right. We held the authority, and therefore, community, you just need to abide and comply by what has happened. And so it was never. I cannot say that I could remember times when law enforcement members took responsibility for their actions, even if they were wrong, in the sense that somebody was harmed, possibly somebody may have died from it, or just something that was dissatisfactory to the community. We looked at the community as you're the ones who are wrong for demonstrating, for protesting, for coming in masses to our building. So just to respond quickly, the perspective was one that was maintained in-house. We only looked at things one-sided from the law enforcement perspective. We wouldn't generally take the perspective of, well, I wonder how the community feels about us killing one of the community members. So that's a, kind of an honest, insightful type of approach, as in how law enforcement, and in my experience in working with many different law enforcement components, looked at those type of demonstrations, as in the demonstrators, the protesters were in the wrong, not law enforcement. And
you shared that mentality. You possess that mentality as well.
As a part of a brotherhood, I'd say I've shared before, but law enforcement at times, when you're a part of this so-called family, a brotherhood, it's the person standing next to you that matters more than what's happening out in the community. You kind of you're taken over by this integrated perspective that it's the work that law enforcement does is greater than whatever is happening out there in our society, in our culture, even if we are responsible for those actions that were taken. So I sadly will say it. Yes, I did take that mentality, even though deep down inside I knew it was not right. So it was kind of going against my moral compass, knowing that we've done something wrong here. We have the obligation to make it right, but I did not ever really see anything in that sense. And I certainly didn't take any actions to make things right while I was there.
Suli, what were your thoughts while you were a member of law enforcement when something happened and community residents may have lashed out at you and your fellow officers for things that you didn't even do?
Sean, I'll be honest, man. Coming from LA, I'm from Paramount. So a lot of my family's from Long Beach and that Compton region area. So when I joined, I was already feeling it from my family, but it's a Samoan community. So, and I hated cops as well. I really didn't want to be a cop. So I have to share that mindset with you. It wasn't until I got my first child and I got graduated that I started to realize I need to work. Right. So for some reason, one of my best friends at that time invited me to come to academy. And that's where I started my journey being a police officer. So being a police officer and then watching all this stuff happening and the community, how they respond to us, I'll be honest, I was very indifferent because to me personally, they don't get what we go through and we don't get what they went through, right? And for me personally, I have to say, I didn't blame the community for how they reacted to us. I really didn't, because I'll be honest, there were guys that I worked with that were so naive to the community. You know, it's like sometimes we get these guys who work straight out of Trader Joe's, and they have no idea who they're dealing with. And so the only training they have is that the training officer that has taught them. And some of these training officers are tackleberries. You know, they come off with this bravado, this toughness that has no business being in police work. I'll be honest, but that's what a lot of these young men were taught, to be this Clint Eastwood, when Clint Eastwood wouldn't even last a week in law enforcement. He would not. We get this Hollywood version of police work, and that's what a lot of these young men are being taught. And I love how Dan said things have not changed. It has not. It has not. Now, I don't mean to go off tangents on your question, but to be honest, to me, I didn't really care how the community reacted, but I also did not blame them for how they reacted. From someone that's had to take a life, and the protesting, and it was a black male adult as well. The person had to take his life, so I felt that pressure, even from my family. But to see my family receive me and give me grace, because they knew my heart, they knew that that's not what I wanted to do. That was not my intention, to kill a black man. That was part of my healing process, is for my family to know who I truly am. And that's what I really would love the community to try to understand, that a lot of these men and women who are in the badge, they don't really think like that. Not all of them. I have to say, Alfonso and Dan would agree, and probably you too, Sean. Most cops do not think like that. We're just like you guys. You just put a belt and a vest on us. We're regular human beings that are being integrated in a system that really needs some work. Really needs some work. Really needs to be reminded about humanity. Really needs to be reminded about the heart issue in regards to how we police, and learn about discretion, stuff like that. But yeah, that's the way I receive it. I hope I answered your question, Sean. But I can.
Yeah, you did. I want to thank you for that. So Daniel, you're the first officer that I've met, and we just put out an announcement. I think today's Monday, so we did it last week. Over 1,000 members of law enforcement have come through our Game Changer program. You're the first officer that I know of that's been investigated by the Department of Justice. So, for those that are watching, take us through that journey of how did you wind up waking up one day being the target of a federal investigation? What were you doing? What were your responsibilities as a member of law enforcement at that time? And how did that all come about?
Yeah, at that time, I was in the Vice and Narcotics Unit, where we were just investigating drug cases, low level, high level. It didn't matter, whatever came on your desk at that time. We were actually working on a major conspiracy case at that moment, where we had wiretaps going on of certain individuals and his organization. I was actually part of the team that while the wiretap was going on, we was going to the locations to tie what we were actually hearing over the phones to actually being in person. So we were shooting videos, photographs, all this stuff to match stuff up. And I remember it was like probably about 3 or 4 months into the investigation, I was going into a local grocery store. And I remember too, Sean, man, I had great connections in the community. I always tell people, man, I was like an honest Denzel Washington on training day. Like I was hardcore, in terms of, man, like I literally believed in the system at that moment. And so I devoted my life to it, studied the criminal law books like it was the Bible, looked up cases like I was an attorney going to trial or something, trying to make the best cases, how to make the best report. But I was going into a local grocery store, and I seen a young lady that was in there, that she was connected with a lot of individuals from a conspiracy that we was looking into. And she told me, she was like, hey man, they're looking into you. I just brushed it off. Like I'm literally the man, I'm not proud of the fact of what I did, but at that number, I put numbers on those walls, man, at that police station that's still up there in terms of incarceration numbers, money seizure, warrant arrests. And I'm not proud of that type stuff. But I was like, but that's where I was at to kind of give you the foundation. Everybody came to me. Anybody, detective looking for anybody, homicide, shootings, anything, they came to me. Drug information, they came to me. I had so many connections out, and so when she was giving me the information, I actually called the case agent up that I knew that was part of our police department. Like, hey man, she told me you investigate me, and I started stuttering on the phone. And so I knew at that point, I was like, that's one-on-one basics of law enforcement, that something ain't right. So at that moment, I just was like, all right, something's not adding up here. And, like a couple of weeks went by, things was transpiring at that moment. And then it turned out, it came out of that it was official, that they were investigating me, which just shocked the mess out of me, man. And basically there was no information that was given. They were just saying, hey, yeah, he is a target of investigation, but we can't get no specifics to it. So at that moment, I still have faith in the system. I still have faith that, all right, they'll find out. I know I'm clean as a whistle. I knew there was nothing that I did or was doing during that era. If you want to probably come at me for some things in my teenage years, I'm guilty as charged, as a teenager. I said, but as an adult, as an officer, first of all, I never wanted to have nobody to have me in their pocket. So I was like, that's one thing that I was like, nobody's going to have me in their pocket to where because I know eventually you're going to tell. I've seen how guys told on their mothers for stuff. So I'm like, you're never going to be able to use me for that card. And as time went on, man, the investigation went on for a whole year. At the end of the year, I was actually, remember the day I was sitting at my desk working on a search warrant. I got pulled into, the sergeant said, hey, you need to go into the chief office. Went into the chief office, seen the union attorneys, city attorneys, seen captains, the chief. And I knew then that something wasn't right, but I still thought that the system is going to work the way it's supposed to improve, that there's no way I could have been dirty at that point. And it got serious when he said, hey, we need your keys, your badge, and your ID. And at that moment, man, I first thought it was a joke. During that time, that's when Punk was on MTV. So I literally thought I was being punked. I thought everybody was going to start laughing. And when I looked around and seen that wasn't nobody laughing, I was like, oh, I ain't being punked. This is real. And that was a defining moment in my life. I wouldn't even be on this social media with you right now if that didn't occur. And that moment, man, I remember leaving the police station when they handed me my papers, told me that, hey, you're being placed on administrative leave. And I just thought it was so unreal. And my daughter had a basketball game that day. I called my wife, said, this thing has progressed to the point to where all the rumors that we keep hearing, they said the investigation has took a turn to where they believe that they was going to get a federal bill of indictment on me. And so they put me off work. And I wasn't nervous, in reference to that. I even felt, even if it got to that point, if I went to the court system, I felt like I knew I was going to win. I knew there was nothing nobody could have had on me. I believed that much of myself that I knew I didn't do nothing. And so I remember I told my wife, I said, well, I'm just going to go home and lay down, try to figure this thing out. And I went in my basement, sat on my couch, man. And I said, man, God, what happened? What happened? I'm like, man, I'm clean. I'm faithful. I'm, doing the things that we say we're supposed to do in terms of taking the kids to church and seeing if I can volunteer in church and stuff like that. Really no real relationship with God at all. I was just basically just going. And it was at that moment, man, as much as I'm talking to you right now, I don't know if it was a voice I heard in the room, voice that was in my heart. I don't know what it was, but I know I heard something. And, and I know I heard something say, man, you love that job more than you love me. And I literally started reflecting over my life. And I said, man, I love this job more than my family, more than life itself, man. When you talk about bleed blue, that I love that job, man. I loved it with every fiber I had. And like when Alfonso was talking about that brotherhood, man, I looked at them mugs more than a brother, man. These guys, I'll die for if I have to. And when at that point, when I heard those words and I knew it was true that I did love that job more than God, I repented to God and said, man, I'm sorry for what I did. I wasn't asking, get me out of this. I never asked God that. Get me out of this situation. I just repented to God and said, I'll do better, man. And you talk about transformation of life, man. I ain't saying I was perfect at that point. You know, I said still was dealing with some baggage and stuff of life, but things did change in my life at that moment, man. I really got back on track, man. And at the end of the whole investigation, man, I remember that I was off work for a year, devoted my life to God, man. I was back in church, man, like with a passion for it, taking missions trips, you know, all over the place. And it changed everything about me, man. It literally it changed my thought pattern about the criminal justice system, the culture of law enforcement, you know, because when I tell you everybody but one officer out of 250 officers turned their back and left me, they left me, you know, and it was one guy, you know, one guy that stayed with me, this guy named Aaron Bears. He's a captain of a police department still today. Man, he didn't leave me. He called me every single day because he was my partner. He knew that it was full of lies, but everybody else left. And it ended the investigation. So it went on for 2 years. I got the call from the chief, and he was like, "Hey, you want to come back to work?" And we both started laughing, and then I just started crying. You know, because I knew God was good. It was just so much good. I knew it had to happen. It had to happen.
Daniel, what were they investigating you for?
From what I was basically told, because we could never get the full file of it, because they said that this investigation would be an ongoing investigation forever, for what we was told, because it was the federal government. From what I was told, it was individuals that was incarcerated at the time that I incarcerated, that all these guys was coming together with this basically the same thing, saying Duncan was taking our drugs, he was putting them on the street, he was pulling us over. He wasn't. He would let us go and give us breaks. He was informing us that there was warrants being done. It was stuff that was so like out of the blue, where somebody would say, "Man, like who? If you bust somebody as a street patrol officer with a kilo of cocaine, man, you are going to be. You are the man. You are like you would walk in that police department, and they would be clapping for you, you know." So I'm like, but the allegations that I was told was that I was letting people go with kilos of cocaine and putting drugs and stuff out on the streets, man. And it was 100% nothing true about it at all. And even in the end of the investigation, when I went back to work and thought it was over, and it wasn't over, you know, it affected my career. They eventually told me that the federal government, the words that I was told from a supervisor, you pull over somebody that's a terrorist and has 100 AK-47s in the trunk, they ain't gonna touch a case with your name on it. And so at that point, I was forced out of Vice and Narcotics Unit, which was all God designed. So I'm not mad about it, you know. And so I got put out of it, but it was a blessing in the end. So I wasn't even individuals that I know for a fact that lied on me, man. There's nothing in the world I wouldn't do for them now. All these guys are out of jail now. You know, I hold no bitterness, no anger towards them. It was designed to happen this way.
So let me ask. I got to ask you this: if all of that, as you say, was 100% fabricated, and I take you at your word, who had it in for you? Who do you think had it in for you? Because it had to have been somebody. Somebody wanted you. So do you feel comfortable talking about that? Because
yeah,
if somebody's lying on you, you had an enemy or two or three.
I had a whole lot of enemies.
Why?
Man, when I told you I was literally Denzel Washington, a clean version of him on training day, that was real, man. Like I was hitting the streets, man, in the same community where I grew up, same people who I grew up with, man. I was so brainwashed at that time to believe that incarceration was the key to make the city better, you know, brainwashed from the academy. So when I went out, man, I didn't cut breaks, you know, everything was by the book, by the law. And I was literally hated by the community during this time. And so individuals that I was putting in jail, a lot of these individuals there was one individual who was the head of the whole conspiracy that we did. He was the one in the end who actually had this thing kicked off because he was the main contributor to it that lied on me to try to get time off, man. But it really wasn't even fully him. It was the system, man. You know, you got to think about it, man. And I didn't think about none of this until it was over with, man. You put an individual in a position to where you allow them to be able to lie. We call it in the federal government, it's called a proffer. You know, so you put these individuals and you allow them to be able to proffer against people so they can go in there. They don't have to have no evidence. They don't have to have a video, a phone number. They don't have to have nothing on you, but their word can go in front of a grand jury and can get a bill of an indictment against people, man. I have seen it. I have sat in the cross from people that I knew they was lying when they're giving this information during their proffer, and yet we still use it to go out and incarcerate people for it. And so this is where it just basically boiled down to. It was the system. I just look at it as the whole entire criminal justice system was all part of this thing.
So, but I'm still having a hard time understanding how you're doing a great job. And I understand how doing a great job can make you enemies, but enemies to the point where you could potentially be locked up in prison. Who disliked you that much, Daniel? Who disliked?
There's the list would have went long, from not just the individuals incarcerated, man, from prosecutors, investigators.
That's who I'm talking about. That's who I'm talking about.
You got to remember too, man, these individuals are not on the same, they're not on, you got to look at how people are raised. And this is what goes into the hiring process of even individuals into law enforcement. I'm like, to be able to sit across from somebody, and to be able to read these individuals and be like, I don't know about that, or to dig a little harder. But then if you could put a top cop, basically as a prosecutor investigator, and to be like, hey man, I got this individual incarcerated. It's no different than in a prosecutor office than it is in a detective room when I'm a detective that solved the case that everybody's trying to get. I'm the top person there. So I think it was a combination of a lot of individuals who wanted to prove a point, and see what they can actually do with it.
Al, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little bit of context coming from my employer being the Department of Justice as a criminal investigator, and having seen many situations like what Daniel went through. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context to how these things could happen to somebody who's actually completely innocent and doing really well in their job. I will say that investigators will often go after the shiniest star, the shiniest object out there, as in they could be investigating a known drug trafficking organization, and maybe somebody gets picked up, arrested, or goes to a proffer, as in Daniel was saying, where they're able to interview before law enforcement, and with possibilities of getting reduced sentences or maybe even their case being dismissed. If somebody that has committed crimes then has an enemy such as Daniel and says, well, I've always had my doubts about Daniel, that he has done things wrong, that he does things illegal. Now this is coming from somebody who's a suspect already for drug trafficking, and they throw out a name, and now Daniel's name is thrown out there. He becomes the shiniest star of all stars out there. Drug traffickers, you could get all day, you could arrest all day long, but if there's a corrupt officer, that becomes a very shiny target of anybody's investigation. Police will actually drop what they do. Investigators will now say, okay, drug trafficker, why don't you work with us so that we could go after the shinier star, and then they become less important. So you could see how the person who is actually trafficking in drugs would then think, well, I could get off on my charges, or I could continue doing what I'm doing if I just keep feeding information towards, what they're looking for. And it's easy to pick up on what some of the cues are that what they're looking for. So they'll begin to possibly interview you or ask you questions. And this is all hypothetical, but asking you questions about Daniel. Well, what has he done? And if things in their reasoning sound as if, well, there's a possibility that he might be involved, now you have this investigation, and it's this blanket investigation that, as Daniel mentioned, doesn't go away, but it does significantly put a burden on your life and everybody around you. And I feel like that's one of the main injustices in federal investigations, or even police department detective type of investigations, where when an investigation blanket is placed on any type of scenario, nobody has access to it. And so we don't know what's going on in those investigations. It's really, they could be led by a hunch. They could be led by, well, it makes sense. He kind of fits the profile. He has the attitude and kind of the personality of somebody that could do something like that. Let's investigate him. And then things start going wrong all of a sudden. That's just one very basic scenario, but inside of that investigative blanket, many things could go. And it could start off with just seeing somebody drive by that you profile and looks as if, you know, illegal things are going on by the way that they drove a car, and possibly by the color of their skin and by the music that they have coming out of their stereo, that could lead to a hunch that then lands that blanket investigation over them and everybody tied to them. As in, it only takes one person to be profiled. Then I would go and look at everybody that that person may be surrounded with. Now they're getting investigated. If something comes up in their criminal record that ties to what I'm looking for, to where my eyes are kind of focused, and really behind it all is so that I could get the glamour of being able to go and get somebody of that caliber. That's why to be able to find Daniel in something, say he had been doing something illegal, that is a great amount of accolade for that investigator, for that person that goes. So really, you put everything aside. Now, the people that you've suspected of committing actual crimes, the drug traffickers that I had mentioned, now become a part of your team and a part of your friend. And they are now kind of housed under that investigative blanket. And now everything's shifted over to Daniel and to whoever he's associated with. In the meanwhile, he's crippled from doing his work, and the amount of stress and the amount of inconvenience and challenges that have to go on, plus the stigma and just the loss of sleep, everything that comes with it, that's just a significant injustice that could happen to really anybody, and good people. And that's where I see that's one of the reasons why I could not continue doing what I was doing. I felt like I was living a life of manipulation, manipulating the scenery, manipulating people, manipulating the environment to go in the direction that I wanted it to go, so that my investigation would play out the way I wanted it to play out.
Well, I want to thank you for that explanation. That makes sense to me. And what you were saying, Daniel, which I believed every word of it, I just wasn't understanding how it got to the point where the federal government was investigating you when you had done nothing wrong. So between the two of you, thank you for that clarification. I'm gonna go ahead, Daniel.
Hey, Sean, I do want to add to you too, because I even remember in one of the questions that was said in my investigation when my department had to do an investigation on me before I came back. I remember the investigator asked me, he said, "How are you so good at what you do?" And so that triggered me to start saying to myself, like, they're believing the components is, you know, like, man, you're putting up numbers that you must be letting something go in order to get all these other things, you know. So it's like you're being punished from being what we call in law enforcement that go-getter. You know, that go-getter there can come back up on you.
Before, Suli, we jump into your story, when Daniel made the statement, I realized, I had a revelation that I love this profession more than I love God. I love this profession more than I love anything. I saw you, Suli, and you, Al, nod your head in agreement. I want to ask this question to all three of you and give you each the opportunity to answer the question. I want to start with you first, Suli. What is it about the profession of being in law enforcement that made you love your job more than anything?
You know, for me, Sean, I have to add my family to it. It was when I start to separate my family from the job, and I start to realize that we had to do certain things at the job more often than we would humanly want to. That's when I start to realize I kind of love this job way better than being home. I wasn't getting along with my wife, so it was more comfortable being at the job. So
what came first, Suli? What came first, Suli? Not getting along with your wife, or the job causing you not to get along with your wife?
That's a good question. For me, it was because of the job. It started to become more apparent, you know, with my wife. Things weren't just as close anymore, and it just became more easier to be at the job because the guys would understand, right? The guys have their wives and they go through the same thing, and then if we get to the psychological part, you know, we do have a component of our discretion, to be out there and making a difference, fill that void of feeling good by making an arrest, by getting out there and doing something that we'll get applauded for, right? And that became more apparent to my heart as well, which I deviated from my family and my two boys. So it became something of a desire for me to be at work, a desire to go after the bad guy, supposedly, right? And to try to get some guys get it for the accolades. For me, it just became something I love to do, just to get out there and catch the person that's breaking law. But there's also the other component that we don't talk about much. I also love getting out there in the community. I had better relationships with people out there, informants, than I had with my wife and my sons, and I think Danny and Alfonso, I mean, they can add to that even further as a beat cop like myself. So that's the best way I can answer it.
Thank you, Suli. Al, did it become the most important thing to you in your life?
Oh, it most definitely was. It was, I mean, what you would call your idol or my top priority.
Why? Why?
And so I was married, 2 children. They were very young. I had just come out of the Marine Corps, so I had come from an environment that was, for other words, gung ho. I mean, I had just come from, 2 combat environments. Then getting into law enforcement, it was the military environment times 10, as in now you have access to all things. It's I didn't start off in that direction. I came in with a heart to want to help and want to do good and want to see our community safe. And a lot of the things that I saw among many of my peers as we were coming in, those that I was in the academy with, and some of the younger agents that I was coming in through the ranks with, we had this perception that we were going to be there to do good things. And then somewhere in there, it kind of just crept in, and the love of power kind of took over. And it's nothing that I noticed while I was there, but it was this kind of addiction of authority that I can't tell you the day or time or even what it looks like. I can only describe it from a perspective. It's this feeling of ultimate authority with access to anything at any time, as if you could walk the streets or anywhere really in the world, and you have superseding authority over all things. And it just kind of becomes almost the only thing I could really compare it to give some, to give a little bit of perspective is like an addiction of something, as in you have to have more of it. And where Suli was saying, you just wanted to get out there on the streets. I would get out of work. I was paid 24/7, as in to work all day long if needed, but we had reasonable time to get off. So maybe around 5 p.m. I'd be off, but I would go directly back out. And nobody knew about it. I was out there on my own time because the adrenaline and the dopamine, the natural hormone release that we get was greater than any type of description of an addiction that you would get. So for a gambler, as soon as they throw the dice down and they're waiting for those dice to turn over, that moment where you're just feeling this rush of hormonal, pleasure inside, it was like that each time that you discovered something, sometimes when you gathered the evidence that was going to make a great case, when you brought people to arrest and you knew that you had the evidence that you needed, it was this overwhelming amount of pleasure that was inside of you, because then you go back and then you're rewarded by pleasure from your peers, just giving you high fives and great job, not looking at the fact that many families are going to be disrupted and an entire cycle of wrongful, living and just families being broken up because of these situations that didn't ever really come to my mind. All I ever felt was really how great it felt to be able to make these arrests, be able to do these great cases. So it became personal more than what I should have been out there for, was to protect and to serve my community and to make our communities safer. It was more about me and continuing to get those hormonal pleasures that you get when you do great things in law enforcement.
So it was like you were your own God. That's what it sounds like to me when it comes to power. And Daniel, you keep bringing up training day. We know he was God out there on those streets, and so it sounds to me like, as Al is talking, you're nodding your head. It sounds like he's explaining your reason for why the job had become more important to you than anything else, and that you loved it more than God.
Man, Sean, I'm telling you, that's why just hearing them two, man, nobody can convince me that God didn't bring these two men into my life, man. They it's like they're speaking for me. I'm telling you, man, it's what Al said, power. Man, that power, man, that I don't care what nobody say, man. When you got that, when you're wearing that uniform and that badge, man, you're a celebrity. You're a local celebrity no matter where you at. You can go into the worst school where you think kids hate police. You're a celebrity when they see you walk in. And for me, it was that power. You go places and they be like, man, that's Dunk. When I'm off duty and they're like, man, that's Dunk, y'all. That's Dunk. Man, that was power, man. Like just like that celebrity. And then when you put that gun on your side, man, I would never paint no picture that I was some hardcore gangster growing up. But I'm just saying, man, my friends would tell you, man, I was scary. I'd say, but my first gun I had, man, I was in the 8th grade. I had a silver revolver with 6 shots. We only had 3 bullets in it. It was like the first time I ever had my gun. My mom would have killed me if she would have known what was underneath that bunk bed. But I'm like, man, having that gun, that uniform, and that badge, you couldn't tell me nothing when I was out there walking around, man. And so everywhere you go, and I think that's what nobody's teaching police officers how to handle that type of power. Nobody's talking about that type of thing. So that was me, man. It was just that power component of life, man.
I appreciate each one of you giving your own personal explanation for why the profession became so much to you. Suli, I want to jump to you in your story. So you're in San Diego. You're a member of the Harbor Police Department, and I'm gonna be a bit of a nerd right now because I'm one of the few people, one of the few civilians that know that the Harbor Police Department, you're also trained to be firemen.
Wow, that's right. Marine
right.
firefighters.
Give me my props, bro. I've been
Someone did their homework.
No. My homework was strictly doing game changer events, and so we had
right on.
police officers come through our program.
Yeah.
I learned that you all are not only trained to be police officers, but you're trained to be firefighters as well. And it kind of makes sense. If you're out on the water and you're making an arrest on the water, boat might catch on fire, et cetera. But a lot of people don't know that you're dually trained. So
yeah.
I'm really curious because I learned that the Harbor Police Department, your typical officer, the focus is on securing the airport area by and large, right? And then with San Diego being unique with the military being on the San Diego Harbor, you have to be aware of some threats that come in through on the water as well.
Correct.
Because you have such a unique set of responsibilities as a member of Harbor Police Department, how did you ever find yourself in a situation where you had to take someone's life as a member of law enforcement? Listen, you said you're from Paramount. If you're a member of the Sheriff's Department up here in LA, I get it. If Peoria Police Department, Al running around in Arizona with the Maricopa County Sheriff Department, I get how they might be in those situations. How did you find yourself in a situation where you took someone's life?
Well, it's a personal thing, Sean. Even if someone gave you a badge and you're at Harbor Police, at a place where you could write out your career doing things without even touching a suspect.
Right.
It's an individual thing. For me, I'm not like that. I need to be in the streets. If Al and my boy Dan was in the streets, they'd be tearing it up in the streets, even with Harbor Police, because in California, as you've learned, once we get that post mandated, right, you get a badge, you get everything that's approved by California with the weapon and everything else that comes with it, and then you also get the authority, correct? It doesn't discriminate all across. If you once you have that under your belt, then you have the discretion to do things. It doesn't matter what. And I've seen many, many, many agencies talk about their differences from other agencies. If one individual officer is motivated to get out there and stop the bad guy or the threat, you have the authority to do so. So for me, I wasn't going to be that guy standing inside a room and just ride out my career in a boat, as a marine firefighter, as a airport guru, as a diver, right? That wasn't me. I needed to be in the streets. And I also planned in the future to transfer to another agency as well. But for me, that's how I found myself in the street, just because that interaction was just typical beat cop interaction with somebody. That was it. So that's how I found myself in that situation.
So talk us through that entire situation.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Man, well, you know what, man, I hope you have another show, because I still think Dan's incomplete, man. I still want to find things out about Dan himself. But Sean, it was just we get a call. We get a call of somebody that earlier during the day, he was found inside the Holiday Inn, and he basically was, trespassing within there. It was a homeless person, as they want to say. And so when I started my shift at midnight, I was a graveyard guy. They told us, hey, Suli, can you go check out this property? Because we had a call of someone that was trespassing earlier. That's where it was. I was like 10-4, of course. So then that's when I started my shift. And I remember telling myself, do I go to 7-Eleven and get my coffee first, or do I check the property that I'm going to see first? And I just wanted to get that out, check the box, right, before I start my evening. And when I went to go check it out, that's when I saw a black male adult. And I'm going to kind of speak in kind of acronyms and kind of how the report was.
just explain to us what the acronyms mean.
So basically, there was a black male adult looking into a vehicle. So I'm going to try to avoid the acronyms, actually. And when you see that at 11 o'clock at night for a police officer, that does look suspicious. Now, doesn't mean he's a bad guy or anything like that. Doesn't mean it's someone that's going to break into a car. No, but we are going to do our due diligence and drive in there. So I drove into the lot and I introduced myself basically at a good distance, rolled down the window from my car from the opposite side and said, sir, how you doing? What I wanted him to see me, look at me, get exhausted, I don't care how he reacted, but he was going to leave. That's how usually cop work happens if you're really doing your job. So when I went there, he sees me, he looks at me, he looks in the air, and just stays like that. Doesn't even want to interact with me, just becomes indifferent. And for me, I'm not going to engage him. He saw me. So that's when I drove away and just stood post, and hopefully he left. I didn't see him anymore from a distance. So as I drove off to head to 7-Eleven, that's when I saw the subject run across the street towards the hotel that they told me to make sure he doesn't get to. And that's when I had to make the call. And I made that U-turn to come around and make contact with him again. You're going to probably have to ask some questions, Sean, because I'm going to kind of roll through this. And that's when I put out the call where I'm at and let them know that the possible suspect's here, but I'm just going to make contact. So I get out of the car. He's walking my direction and I'm walking towards him. And I tell him, sir, San Diego Harbor Police, I need to talk to you. And he just keeps talking. He just keeps walking towards me. And as he gets closer, I knew he wasn't going to just move. So I moved. So once I moved, he walked past me and I had to make that decision again. Do I just let him leave? I couldn't. I had to make sure if this is someone that's a threat, or if this is someone who has no respect for police officers or anything, any authority, that to me, that kind of gets to me. I had to at least follow him and talk to him. So I was following him and I said, sir, you're going to have to stop. And thinking my my partners are arriving, right? And as he slows down, he puts his hands into his pockets, and that's when, for me, as a defensive tactics instructor, that's something you don't do. That's a threat to me. So once he put his hands in his pockets, that's when I grabbed his elbows, and I just held him there. I said, "Sir, you're gonna have to stop." San Diego Harbor Police, and I was already trained to identify myself, and so I just held it there. What I didn't anticipate was his was the way he. I didn't anticipate how angry he was going to get, and I remember he just started to flinch up, and then he just spun right into me. Next, you know, we're face to face, and I'm looking at him. He looks down at my holster, and then he grabs it with two guns. He starts trying to pull it out. That's when I just automatically just start grabbing his wrist, and that's when the dance. I call it the dance. That's when we started to basically struggle with each other throughout our interaction with each other. And I remember telling him, "Bro, you gotta let go. Bro, you gotta let go."
He's trying to get
And
the gun. He's trying to disarm you.
he's trying to take the gun out of the holster. Yeah, and I'm trying to keep that hand because I don't trust my level two. Level two is basically click click, right? I didn't trust that the gun was in, so I just made sure that hand was in, that he's holding on to his two hands holding on to my holster, I mean to the gun, was stuck in there. And then we just started to go around, and that's when I just tried to tell him, "Bro, let go." And it got to the point where he was just, I could still smell him to this day. I could still feel his anger, his rage. And then he basically jumps onto my waist with his two knees, and he just yells, and he just tries to leverages the gun out. And that's when my vest comes up. That's when my belt, separates from the Velcro, and the gun is basically up here. And for me personally, I was like, you know what? The more I hold them, the more it feels like it's coming out. So I decided to just go to the floor and just try to hit his head onto the ground. And so I jumped, and as we went to the ground, what I didn't anticipate, my hands were not going to let go of his wrist. So the first thing that hit the deck was eventually my head. And I remember just hitting the deck, and I could see stars. But my hands were still on the wrist. And then next thing you know, we're looking at each other face to face like this, and he's just grunting, and he's pulling, and the gun is actually almost at my face now, and my vest is like up here, it's out of place, and he's just aggressively pulling out. And that's when we started, I call it the washing machine, where we just started flipping over each other, just keep going back and forth. I didn't want to let go of that wrist, and nor did he want to stop from trying to pull it out. And it got to the point where, eventually he started to tire out a little, and I was able to stay within his legs on the ground. So I was in between his legs. You get a picture of that. His back is on the floor, and I'm looking down at his chest, and I could hear him breathing. So I just stuck my forehead into his sternum and still held down his wrist, and I spread out my legs, and I just stayed there. And I had to make a decision. I had my backup knife right here. Should I shank him, or should I just get on the radio? And I felt like I was in control. So I got on the radio and I put out cover now, which means basically I need help, guys. I need help now. And I just let go of the radio, and I can hear dispatch calling units out, and I can hear sirens from afar. And that's when I felt, okay, I think I'm going to be okay. I think I'm going to be okay. So I just stood ground. I could hear him still trying to grunt it out. Next thing you know, he takes one hand off it, and I have two hands on one wrist of his wrist. And this time I feel really secure now. I don't care what you do. You can hit me all you want. So he was like trying to bang me in the head. I just held everything in. And then next thing you know, things went black. Things just went total black.
He hit you in the temple?
He hit me all over. He was trying to knock me out or something, just trying to do something where he can at least get released from me. Because it looked like at that point, sometimes it feels like he didn't want the weapon no more. He just wanted to get away. But because I was stuck into him, and because he was exhausted, that's when he started to realize, okay, he's not gonna be able to get the gun out. So he just started banging on my head. But to me at that time, I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel anything. I felt good. You know, as someone who's trained in boxing and what have you, that, you know, I was just covering up like that. He was hitting the top of my head. So it was not doing anything.
You said things went black for you though.
That's where I'm getting at right now.
Okay.
So what happened, he actually brailled my belt. He found my taser holder. He felt that the handle, he pulls it out. And that's when he put it against my head in the back right here. And that's when he proceeded tasing me. And that's
He
when
tased you in the back of the head.
he tased me in the back of the head. And because it was against my head, the doors weren't able to open. So if it doesn't open, it doesn't start that 5-second circulation. That means it does 5 seconds, but it'll continue to do the 5 seconds. And according to investigations, it went over 40 seconds that I was stuck there. And that's when I went black. That's when I went, I guess, unconscious at that time. And the reason why it's important, because you talked about mental illness, that's where the trauma really occurred. Because in that blackness was just me and a black world. But I was still conscious. You know, I was like, where am I? And that's when I started thinking, am I dead? And if I am, I actually felt good, because the part I didn't explain through all that with him, that was probably the most fearful I've ever been in my life. And going through that, and then all of a sudden things were just black, was a bit peaceful for me. But then images of my wife and my 2 boys start to show, and then a fourth figure of like an overexposed body. But it started to show. So my wife, my oldest, my youngest, and that fourth figure, my wife. And the more I saw that, the more I started to realize, oh, something's not right here. I'm still here. And then I start to hear like the movie reels, da, 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 like it was flickering. These images are flickering. And next thing you know, my eyes open and I could see his abdomen and I could see the road. And then I can hear a taser machine. I could hear the tasing gun just click, 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 click. And it was a tasing sound I was basically, it felt like I was watching a movie reel, but it was actually the taser sound that was just flickering, flickering, flickering. And when knowing that that was there, that's when I started to try to move, and I could not move. I was incapacitated. So I could not move. I couldn't even yell. I couldn't even move my mouth. And that's when true fear that it's tough for me to articulate really start to set in my heart, my soul, and my mind. It was fear mixed with shame, because I felt like I let my wife down, and I felt like I left my sons down. And then the fact that I thought that I was gonna die, and I failed my family, was something. It's really, even to this day, it's tough to really to write down or even explain to people unless you've really been there. And that's when I start to give up, because I start to really settle in and say, okay, he got me, checkmate. So I thought he was going to take the gun and then place it to my temple and take a shot. And all I could think about was how I failed my wife, how I failed her, and how my boys, in those split seconds, I couldn't believe I was like thinking like that. And then something just kicked. Something kicked in me that is like, oh, hold up. I've been tased before numerous times. I've been through trainings where I've been cattle pronged before in the neck. I could get out. And even though I couldn't move, it was those images that, to me personally, really I needed to get home. That's what started to get to me. And in order for me to do that, that's when I had to dig this rage I never thought of or felt in my life. And it was a rage where I am going to kill this guy. I'm going to drink his blood. I'm going to take this guy apart, and I'm going to do everything I can, because he's trying to take me away from my family, and I can't believe you did. And I just started to think like that. And I just started thinking of my boys. They love USC, and I just started saying, fight, fight, fight. And I start yelling at him internally. And even to the point where I was like, my body started to convulge. If I can get my hand to touch his elbow and I can use my body to hit it, I know I have a chance in order to release it. So through all that, and I remember yelling internally, and I felt like a ball of like a volcano that was about to explode. And that's when I just went all raged out, and I was able to touch something. I don't know what it was. And I remember just yelling internally, and I hit it. And that's when the taser separated from the neck, opened up, and the two prongs went there each way. And I do remember looking at him, and I just punched him in the chest. And I came up, and I don't remember how it came to be, but my gun was up here at my head, and I looked at him, and I just center mashed right into him. It wasn't till I know seconds earlier, I wanted to literally kill this guy. But to see him look at me from the floor, he had this look of like bewilderment, and he didn't have a weapon on him. I just could not shoot. So I looked at him and I said, "Get down." He looks to the ground, and I see the taser there. He looks at the taser, and he starts to walk up towards me. And that's when I felt, this is it. I'm not even going to mess with this guy. And I felt like this line that he crossed. And that's when I center massed Sean and took one shot. And he goes to the ground. He goes to the deck. He tries to get back up, and I look at him again. I said, "Stay down." And this time I knew I was going to do a double shot to the head. If he tries to get up one more time. And I remember getting off position. He looks up, he tries to get up, and I'm about to do a double tap. And all of a sudden the blood starts spitting out of his chest. And it was like spitting out all over the street. He looks at it, he looks at me, he puts his hands down, and he lays on his back. That's when I put out shots fired, shots fired. Got down, took out my knife, ripped up his shirt, and started proceeding with CPR. And that's when finally one person came behind me, grabbed my shoulder, and it happened to be my boy, Sammy. And he grabbed me, he says, "You're good." He drags me out. And that's when the other officers came and proceeded to do their work on him. But he was deceased eventually.
So Suli,
So
how long have you known Daniel and Al?
I've known Al, man, since 17, I believe, shortly after I gave my life to Christ. Since 17.
And Daniel?
Daniel, you got to correct me on this. Probably what, months ago? Maybe 6 months ago? Yeah, recently.
Have Daniel and Al, have you heard Suli describe his experience in that level of detail? Is it your first time hearing all that?
I actually connected with Suli, a big part of it based on this trauma he was going through. I feel it was something that was just God ordained type of thing. We just met through a mutual friend for this reason, as in the friend shared, here's somebody that you could relate to. A lot of the same friend knew a lot of my past, and a lot of it being similar to what Suli's experience was. So when Suli and I connected, we immediately found a heart for each other, and we're able to relate to each other really well. And we both were coming from very difficult pasts, and so we worked together to find our identities and trying to get past that trauma. And then as we got closer in the Lord ourselves. But so I have heard it, but Daniel.
No, I never heard it. I heard about, like, somewhere, just a little piece of information, but I never, man, like you said, 6 months, but you would think we've been knowing each other for 6 years, like God truly connected us from day one, and we met on a real fluke. When I tell you a fluke, we met on a fluke. Yeah. And from day one, we kicked it off. But no, I heard about it even from that moment when I met him, but I never wanted to ask him about it or talk about it, because I know I can just imagine what that trauma would be to even relive it again. So that's why I never even asked him about it.
I just asked the question because as Suli's talking, I'm looking at you, Daniel, and you locked in. You're listening to every single word that he's saying. And I can't help but but guess that what was happening with you was happening with me. I'm visualizing the whole situation because Suli, you described it with such detail. But what I can't do is put myself in the position of being an officer with my vest on, with my tactical belt on. But Daniel can, and Al can. And I just wondered if you guys were having any type of a personal experience or flashback experience of your own while listening to what Suli was saying.
I would say, Sean, in reference to me, it would be more of, it's one of the ones like I never had to be put in a situation to take somebody's life and to pull the trigger. But I was in ridiculous amount of situations where I should have, literally. I guess, man, like I really just thank God, because I just know I don't believe at all that that's something Suli got in this uniform and wanted to do. You couldn't convince me of that from just my short time knowing him. You couldn't convince me of that, and I don't think I think the public thinks that every officer wants to do that. I don't believe that either. I ain't anti-police and I ain't pro-police, and I was like, but I don't believe that that's a goal. Like officers come on, like this is what I want to do from day one. Not saying that for everyone. I'm saying for the majority, I don't believe that.
Yeah.
So my heart goes out to him, and my heart goes out to him, and not just him, man. There was a lot of people affected by it. And I don't even know everyone on there, but I can just imagine his family. I can imagine the other individual family, them as well, man. So many unknown questions. There were so many things that he even lives through. I wish something would have happened different. So I can't do nothing but thank God and say, man, God, thank you, that I had to be in that type of situation before. And I just pray for his peace.
Mm-hmm. Sean, on my end, just real quick, as Suli was explaining that, I've heard it several times, but each time it's almost like the same. It really brings me back to my own personal reflection and trauma that I'm possibly even still dealing with. I don't know that I'll ever fully forget or be able to be 100% past those traumas. Traumas are just one of those things that get trapped inside of the brain somewhere, and they could be triggered at any given moment. Suli said something that really impacted me. There was just the smell that he still remembers to this day. He may be out at his son's ball game, and somebody that resembles that smell may trigger him back to those feelings. Then those emotions rise up, and it could then begin to trigger so many other things. And that's one of the prime reasons why I became a mental health specialist. I mean, leaving the Department of Justice, I said, I need to find help for myself first before I could be any help to anybody else. And that's really, as the three of us talk, is one of our main focuses, because there's so many other people out there, law enforcement, as well as those on the other side of the law that are faced with trauma, and that does not allow them to be the best of themselves. And I knew leaving the Department of Justice that I was not going to be the best person that I could be to my family that I had neglected for so many years. And when I finally made the decision, it's time to really live for what is the most important to me, which is not my career, which I was, kind of blinded for a season by that. I actually separated myself and then began to find myself and find those traumas. And for me, it's certain sounds. If I hear a certain sound that are just distinct, it'll bring me back as if I'm exactly in that same place. I even still have to at times catch myself from flinching, from taking a defensive posture. I heard something not too long ago, just the other day, and I turned around into a fight mode. And I'm so far away from that these days, but still, there's still little things that are trapped inside the head. And that just, so the three of us getting together is to really think about those people that are still involved in this. And so many law enforcement officers, just by the duties that they perform on a daily basis, their focus is on all the bad things of the world. So how could we expect that they don't carry bad things and then therefore behave at times in wrongful ways because of those things that they carry? And so that's really our purpose, is really to assist people through our experiences and our understanding and our education on how people could find their way through trauma and mental health.
All right.
So obviously, Suli, that was traumatic for you. Daniel, you experienced your own trauma being accused of multiple things that you didn't do. So Suli, you now you have to deal with the fallout of this, not just personally, but professionally. You found yourself in a position where you had to take another man's life in self-defense, and you did it. And I've read that you resigned from law enforcement. You weren't fired from law enforcement.
Yeah,
Why?
yeah, you're right there.
Why did you?
So, you know,
Why did you resign? And why didn't they fire?
yeah. Well, let me see, Sean. This is the way I could explain it. So I went into mentally, I went into defense mode in regards to I got to get back on duty, right? So I did everything I can. I said what the therapist needed to hear. I said what.
Hang on a second. Where
Yeah.
have I heard that before, Al? So go ahead, Suli.
So yeah, I know it's I'm preaching to the choir here, but we just wanted to get back on the saddle. Even to the even the higher ups that says, Suli, got to get back on the saddle, man. And it's like, well, absolutely, I'll be right on it. What I what I didn't anticipate, Sean, was the things I couldn't control that were going on in my head from that moment of getting tased. I think that's the key right there. When I was getting tased, whatever was going on in my head and knowing I couldn't move, I couldn't control it. I was seeing the same suspect while I was at work. Like I said, I did everything I did to get back to work. I came back to work 3 months later. I was full, everyone giving me a handshake, good job here and there. But when I went out to the streets, that's when I started to see him. I started to smell him. I started to associate every black male adult as him. And there was one night I'll share, and it came out. We're looking for this one person. We're looking for a white male adult, right? And I found I found the suspect, but he looked just like the suspect that I had to go at it with that one night. It was my eyes, my brain saw a black man, red shirt, tan pants, and I put on the radio that I'm seeing this person right now. And I remember the sergeant at that time was listening, and he was like, "We're not looking for a black male adult, red shirt, tan pants. We're looking for a white male adult, blue shirt, white shorts." But I kept putting on the radio. I see him right now. I'm going to go make contact. And I start telling him, I need units there right now. So my brain was doing things, playing games on me. And that sergeant, we did have a talk afterwards. And he was telling me that I need to get help, but he would also cover for me, right?
How so? How so?
He wouldn't bring it up to the higher ups. Suli, just take care of yourself, man. Make sure you're good to go, okay? And we'll keep watching over you. But in all reality, that was a clear signal that I needed to be off duty at that moment. Because what I did, I kept adjusting. So if I saw him in my brain, I wouldn't put it on the radio. I kept it to myself. And during patrol, I'll start to feel rage. I'll start to feel rage for people out of nowhere. And I really started to feel rage for my own department. I started to think about it was 3 minutes I was going after this guy, and not one guy showed up. And it was during overlap. And Alfonso and Dan, you guys understand, that's when we have end of shift, the new shift comes in. So you literally have two shifts in the same house. And when I was going through what I was going through with this gentleman, no one showed up until 3 minutes later. The one person that showed up was on a boat on the opposite end of the bay. And it happened to be my boy, who knew that if I get into something, there must be something going on. So I had a lot of animosity for my department. I had a lot of animosity when I start hearing that each one of them were seeing therapists for the incident that I was part of. I didn't get that. I started to feel real angry.
Hang on, hang on, hang on,
And
hang on, hang on. Stop, stop. They were seeing a therapist for your officer involved shooting?
yes, so they would have a therapist come over and speak to the department during the evenings to make sure that they're okay. So if I'm going to be devil's advocate and think on their part, they're thinking, let's make sure our men and women are okay from this incident. Now, here's the thing: not once did they offer me a therapist. And my wife will here to tell you right now, I stuck myself in this house and I did everything I can to try to get better. But the only thing I knew was see a therapist. That's it. Um, so they were going through their issues, right? And bless their heart, they were trying their best to try to reach out to me. And, but certain things like getting this remark: hey, Suli, better you than me, man. Only you could take. And to me personally, I get where they're coming from, but to hear that continually from officers was not something I wanted to hear at that time.
It's cold.
Right. And for me, all I kept thinking about was, where were you? Because I know where you were. I did my own investigation. I knew where every single body was that night. I knew every single body. All they had to do was listen to the radio. They didn't listen to the radio. And so that's when my brain started playing tricks on me. Do they hate me? Like, I know, I can only imagine, Dan, what you're thinking going through with your department betrayal, right? For me, I start thinking, do they want me to die? Why didn't they come? And I'm an instructor. I taught these people that you don't need to have something bad for you to go check on your partner. I started to go.
Let me get this straight.
Mm-hmm.
When you went through that whole ordeal, the only person that showed up when you had called, you had radioed this situation in, was your boy Sammy. Is that what you're saying to me? And
they all showed up, but Sammy was the first one to grab me. They showed up eventually, though, Sean. But that was
eventually. I just asked the question because so many residents, especially young adults and juveniles that participate in game changer trainings with law enforcement, which Al has participated in several of them. They always ask the question, you cops pulled me over for a broken taillight. Before I knew it, there was 9 cop cars there, right? Over a broken taillight. And if I'm keeping it a buck, it's always Latino and Black kids telling about this story. I haven't had any white kids tell the story about getting pulled over for a broken taillight and 9 cop cars show up. I'm keeping it real. I'm not making this up. I'm relaying to you what community residents have shared with me. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to know how you all feel about what Suli said. You know how law enforcement gets down. You guys are members of law enforcement. Why did it take so long for a call that was so serious for officers to show up for something that's life and death when you got no problem showing up for a broken taillight with a brother who's wearing a do-rag and a tank top? What is that about? What is that about? I don't blame you for being cynical about that, Suli. Why did it take them so long to provide you with backup? When, man,
Sean, that's
a situation that warranted backup. This situation clearly warranted backup as opposed to broken taillight.
Right. I thought the same thing, Sean. I thought the same thing. The reason why I say that is because when I used to make these stops, I used to tell myself, mother effers, why are you all here? Why are you all here? Right? That's part of why I got so angry. Where were you at that same night? So I'm with you and I feel you. And that's part of we could go back and talk about that Clint Eastwood thinking, right? Especially when people think they're tough, they're Hollywood tough, but when it came down to it, those efforts were scared. When they heard me desperate on the radio, when they heard my breath on the radio, because you could hear, there's a part in the radio where you can hear me struggling with him. You can hear me grunting. You can hear the other guys. Something tells me that they were caught off guard. They were caught off guard. And when they responded, there was a bit of fear in there. But I'm going to say this too, Sean. I'm a type of police officer that when you come to my scene, you better have your head on the swivel. You better come and you better shut your mouth. Don't bother me when I do my work. I know, Dan, you understand that with your kind of work. You can't have a guy coming here bother the relationship you have with the person. So the only thing I can give to them is they didn't want to show up because they knew that, okay, if I'm going to go, that kind of caused a delay in their response to come to me, right? Because a regular response was they should have came out when came out and I put out their description of the subject long time ago. And then I didn't even tell them, hey, don't come. I put out the description of the subject. I'm going to make contact. My brain thought people were coming already. Nowhere did I think that they would come when they heard me struggling with him. So to me, they were caught off guard. But in regards to what you're talking about, Dan, Sean, I absolutely hear you in that, whatever you want to call it, man. They would come hot to a regular contact of someone, but when it came to this moment, you got to understand when things get hot, it's not the same. You start to see who the true officers are.
So Daniel, in looking at some information about him before we got together tonight, Daniel had stated in so many words that the brotherhood inside the force is not what it seems. The brotherhood inside the force is not what it seems. And this brotherhood that you talked about, each one of you have talked about, and it was a main factor in why law enforcement, like being a cop, was the most important thing to you in your lives. And when you really needed your brotherhood to be there for you, they weren't. You know what that sounds like? It sounds like these kids that are in a gang. And when they got arrested and they're in prison, all their homies were nowhere to be found. And that's why so many people in the community believe that you guys are part of your own gang. It's a different gang, but it's a gang. And what you just described to me is what it's almost identical, but it's not identical to how gang members look around and realize these fools never cared about me. These fools weren't there for me when I was doing 12 years. Not one of them came to see me. And I want to share this with you. I want to share this with each of you. Early on, Suli, you said something, and I got goosebumps right now. You talked about you were in a position where you thought you were going to die, you thought you were dead, and you were good with it. You felt peace. I interviewed a brother by the name of Ernesto Sanchez here in LA. He was on my show because he spent, I think, 15 years in prison. He was supposed to get 200 and some odd years. He shot at the cops. They shot him 5 times. And he's laying in the street in his own blood. And I asked him, I said, what was going through your mind at that moment? Were you praying to live? He said, nah, man. If I was going to die, I was cool with it. And to have him tell me that months ago on the other side of the law, and you're telling me that as a member of law enforcement when you were in pretty much the same situation, that for moments you were like, if I'm dying, if I'm dead, this is pretty peaceful. That is wild to me. That's wild for a cop to say this and for a gangbanger to say the same thing. And how about this? You both love the Lord.
Amen.
You both love the Lord. He was wearing he was raised Catholic. So he was wearing, I think it was a St. Christopher medallion that I think his grandmother gave to him for protection. He wasn't worried about living. He was okay with dying. And I don't know what it is about, they say that there's a thin line between love and hate. This 8-year journey of me spending time with members of law enforcement and members of the community that are civilians, and so many that were on the wrong side of the law, y'all got a lot in common. You all have a lot in common. So I wanted to share that with you. And do you have any thoughts about what I just said, sharing, comparing the similarities between Suli's experience and Ernesto's experience when you're out in the street on the pavement thinking you're going to die, and y'all were good with it? What is that about? I know you snapped out of it, Suli, but do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I would say God ain't finished. He wasn't finished with Suli, and if he wasn't finished with Ernesto, he just wasn't finished with both of them, And I'm like, they got work to do. And I look at it as God has extended their life to give them more time to be able to do His will.
Mm-hmm.
I could share.
Go ahead, Al.
I can share a similar story to Suli. I'll make it quick. But we were involved in what we call a buy bust. It's pretty traditional, done in the enforcement of drug type of work. But we were showing the drugs, thinking that the suspects were going to bring out the money. And as soon as we saw both, we were going to nab them right there. We were just going to arrest them. And so I was doing the undercover, and we had an informant with us. That means a guy who had been arrested, who introduced me to this gang. And so they were gang members. They were a pretty powerful gang in that local general area, but we went ahead and set it up just like we do these type of meets all the time. So we have a security team that surrounds the undercover. And I was a part of HRT, the hostage rescue team. So it's, small arm tactics and such. So I felt pretty confident with my team. And one of those team members is a sniper. So he's holding M4, maybe about 100 yards away. So I feel I'm pretty safe. What could go wrong here? Also, I'm sitting in the passenger seat of the car of my vehicle. It's full of drugs that I'm going to show to the guys who are going to allegedly buy them. Well, they decide to do a rip, basically rob the drugs and not pay for them. So 3 vehicles show up and they boxed me in. So our car wasn't able to leave. They jump inside of the car that I'm in that's full of drugs, and they throw a bag over my head so I can't see. And they start beating me with the butt of their rifle. I believe it was a shotgun, the way that it felt on the side of the head. It felt like a shotgun. So I'm getting hit on the side of the head. I have a bag over my head. I can lightly see through it. And there's another barrel pointed to my forehead. And at that point, I kind of had to make amends with myself. And I kind of had the same type of flashback experience that Suli had. I thought about my family. I thought about my boys, my 2 young boys, thinking I didn't say bye to them this morning, those type of things. That's what really found out or rediscovered what was most important, because in that moment, I'm enjoying the rewards of being this, tough law enforcement guy with all the power, like I mentioned earlier. And here I am in this situation, and all I could think about is my family that I had been neglecting for so long. Not on purpose, just falling in love with the job. Through the bag that I'm wrapped inside, I could slightly see the barrel, and then I could see a hand with a finger on the trigger. And if you're if you know anything about tactics and safety, is you don't put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to fire. And so when I saw that finger on the trigger, I settled with myself. I'm going to die at this moment. The guy's ready to shoot, because in my mind, it was ingrained. You don't put your finger on the trigger until you are ready to fire. And since I saw that so distinct, that's what at times wakes me up at night, is the image of that finger. I even see the details of the fingernail. I mean, that's how much it became ingrained in my brain that I was going to die at that moment. And so inside of my mind, I'm thinking nothing else matters. And I just said, Jesus, forgive me that I've also neglected you, and that this job became more important to me than what you've shown me. And so I just said, ready to go. And so I was really just starting to close my eyes and just to face death. I felt for a second the barrel came off of my forehead because now all of my partners were moving in. The thought that came to me is, why didn't they shoot? I have been on the other end of the sniper rifle, and I know that if a weapon comes out on your undercover or on an officer, you're going to take that shot. You're legally able to take that shot. It would be considered a good shoot. And I was wondering, I know who's behind that rifle. Why is he not protecting me? He's only 100 yards away. They don't even have to come to me. All he has to do is fire. And he didn't. So I held that anger for a long time. And during that time, it was bothering me. Why isn't my buddy, my brother, helping me out in this moment? And I felt, just like Suli, I felt that he froze. Because after I said, what the hell? You saw me about to die. I should be dead right now. I'll tell that after. But for a second, I felt the barrel that moved away from my forehead because they started to see all my people move in. And in that moment, I was able to dive out of the window. I don't know how I did it. I don't even remember making any type of movement towards it. All I know is that I was halfway out. The window was only halfway open, so my body had to fit through maybe about 6 inches of window. And somehow I slid out. The car was in motion at this time. So I'm tumbling on the ground. I got scuffed up, whatever, but I lived. At the end of all that, the guys left. My team went and arrested them. It was a gigantic mess all over the road. The van that they were in, it flipped a few times. Drugs were all over the street. They ended up arresting them. I ended up getting away. But at the end of it, when I'm facing my team and my boss, they asked just very simple things, like as in, I'm glad you're here. I thought you were going to die. I'm glad you're not dead. My boss said, you're going to have to see a counselor. And then he kind of gave me like an elbow bump and a wink saying, but whatever you say to them could determine how the rest of your career is going to play out. Meaning, don't say too much. If you're affected by this, work it out on your own or somewhere else. But, you don't want to talk too much is basically what he was saying. And so I took his advice, as well as, the culture was, don't ever really talk to a therapist because you don't want to lose, your ability to enforce the law. So I saw the counselor, said what needed to be said, just to get me back on regular, working abilities. And by the next day, I was back out on the street. And so I have to think about that now. How many law enforcement officers, military, and people on the other side of the law go through these traumatic events and are back out there on the street the next day, now with all of these pressures and emotions that are out of control, hatred, rage, like Suli mentioned several times. I was in rage. I was mad that this was able to happen. First of all, that these guys try to do this to me, the gang, that my own team didn't protect me, that my agency was acting like it was no big deal, like nothing had happened. And, oh, you'll be fine, brush it off, with scabs on the side of my face, from the road rash and all that stuff. But here I am playing it out as in, yeah, I'm fine. I'll be okay. But if you got a glimpse of what it was like in my house, at home, with my wife and with my children, where I feel safe. See, outside of my walls, I have to be this mirror image of a guy who's got it all under control. But when I get home, where I'm safe, where I'm not triggered by anything, where do you think those emotions are going to be released? There in my home with the people that I feel safe with. So who do you think is going to take the brunt of that trauma? It's probably my wife, probably my children, not on purpose. I love them, but it's something that's within me and is not being processed. So naturally I'm going to take it out. Long story short, my wife and I ended up divorcing. Thankfully, God, thank you. 10 years later, we remarried after I found myself, but I'm just telling a short narrative of what happens out there when trauma is left without it being dealt with, without it being, without somebody working on themselves and finding that processing of those traumas. And so that's one of the things that I consider about today's law enforcement. Not to say that there's anything bad about them or negative, it's just that they've seen a lot. And when that trauma goes untreated, then their behavior begins to represent that trauma.
So listen, I know that Daniel has to bounce here in a bit. I want to ask you each to give thought to the answer to the question I'm about to ask. And Daniel, if you need some time to think, take your time. Al just brought up, he mentioned law enforcement culture. Each one of you think about this. If there was one thing about law enforcement culture that you could change, what would it be? There's one thing about law enforcement culture that you could change. What would it be? Daniel, if you don't have your answer ready, oh, you ready? Okay, tell me, what's the one thing about law enforcement culture that you could change? When you're done, we'll go to Suli, then we'll end with Al.
Man, this stuff plays in I think guys that think different heads 50 million times, man. So I guarantee you, if you want one, we can give you 100. You know one, but
give me your top one. Give me your top one.
Top one would be, I think it has to start from the top. So I think when we keep the system of law enforcement and policing is always, basically I give it for where I was from is you're a patrol officer, from an officer to a sergeant, to a lieutenant, to a captain, to assistant chief, to a chief. And so basically what you're doing, you're bringing that culture from that first year rookie is still staying with them that whole entire time all the way to the top. So my top one piece would be you have to bring in individuals who are not prior police to be in these positions to where they're making decisions in law enforcement. You do not have to be a police officer just to be a police chief. And so I said, I think I would first say start dealing with these individuals, these positions to where you want to start bringing in individuals that may think different, man, that may be better for the community. So I would say with the heads of the police departments, man, they don't have to be prior police officers. So mine would be police personnel.
So devil's advocate, why should I follow this person who knows nothing about this job? You don't know what it's like to be out there. You don't know what it's like to have a shotgun pointed to your temple like Al. You don't know what it's like to struggle for your life against a guy who's grabbed my taser and is trying to kill me. Why should that person be the chief if you don't know what it's like to be in the profession?
I don't believe you have to. You have to know those instances that happen where you have to use deadly force is so rare in law enforcement. I'm sorry, I got my son. The sun coming in now.
Daniel, don't misunderstand me. I'm saying from a morale standpoint, would type A guys feel great about working in a department for some chief that doesn't even know what our experience is like? That's what I'm getting at.
Oh, definitely. But that's where you break the culture. That's where you break the culture from the guys. That's when you break the culture to bring a different perspective in that's not rooted and grounded in law enforcement. Yeah, I understand, man. When you start rising up in ranks in law enforcement, it's totally less about even some of the officers. It's all about yourself at that point. It's all about yourself. You don't want to be held accountable for something that your officers did. So it's more about a liability standpoint to when you're rising up to that chief, is this guy going to get me sued? Is this guy going to have me in federal court? This guy going to be getting things taken away from me because decisions that they made? So I look at it, it's a different mindset that I believe these guys are having when they rise in ranks. And so if you can change that component of it and put people in those places and say, man, the system is different in terms of if you want to bring something different into the police organization in your community, they don't have to be police. They don't have to know all the certain things that happen in the street to be able to look at a policy and say, we can change this thing that happened there. And I know police officers would frown upon that. I totally know they would, but I just don't believe it, man. From my roots and boots on the ground.
You're saying that's the culture change. That's a drastic culture change. I consider him a friend, certainly a colleague. Jim McDonald is the new LAPD sheriff here. I'm sorry, the new LAPD chief. Before that, he was the LA County Sheriff. Before that, he was the sheriff at Long Beach, I believe. The reason why he got the job, in my opinion, is because he was most qualified. He's been a chief and he's been a cop. So what you're talking about, Daniel, is a radical change in law enforcement culture. I get it. Suli, what's your one thing that you would change about law enforcement culture? What's the one thing, the biggest thing?
the one thing for me, it's got to be faith. There's got to be some kind of faith aspect involved in the whole process. And I don't mean let's bring TD Jakes out here and pray upon people and just, total Holy Spirit thing. What I'm talking about is men of God, women of God who have an understanding of that foundation of the biblical terms of the word, right? And we don't even need to go there. It's just understanding empathy, understanding humanity. You brought up something, you started this, in regards to that death thing and Mr. Sanchez and what I said. And I have to tell you, that is a perfect petri dish of all of us, regardless of what we do, regardless of what we experience, what we do. You saw a sense of humanity in all of us there, a sense of it doesn't matter what we've been through or what we've gone through. That sense of peace is there when we get to that wall, right? And I love that you shared that Sanchez said that, because I got to be honest, for me, when I go back and speak to police officers and being a minister at this time and speaking to people as civilians, we're all going through the same thing. And Dan, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think we should wrestle with that. Because I don't totally agree with you, but this is something we can wrestle with, because I definitely feel whatever's up there right now ain't really working, Sean. Ain't really working. That humanity part is separating. That whatever Hollywood puts out, we do what Hollywood says. So we need men, for me, that faith aspect. I don't know how, what, and where, but there needs to be some type, and I know in California it's almost impossible, but there needs to be some type of training with men and women who have been affected by Christ, that can share that same kind of humanity, that love to these police officers, and so they can remember that we are not Clint Eastwood. They can remember that we have that power. I love how you said power, but there's power in discretion. There's so much power and discretion. That's what I love, and I still love today, is the fact that we have things, you have authority, but you don't use it, but you use it for the good. That's such a blessing, Sean. And so for me, I don't, it's a great question. I'm going to ponder that all night. But what's your one big block that I think should be in training, or an opportunity for them to be freely to do so, especially in California, is to be reminded of the biblical of Christ and what he could do in our hearts, and how that can help you be a better police officer. I promise you that. I promise.
So before we get to you, Al, how are you on time, Daniel? Because I want to give you an opportunity to plug whatever you want before you take off. I know you got to go. I'm looking at the clock. I want to do this on my own. Daniel has a book out there.
Yeah.
Sorry, Daniel, I'm doing this to you. The name of the book is A Kingdom Police Officer, Pathway Through the Blue. I'm sure it's an excellent read. It explores the complexities of police culture and its impact on both officers and the community. So I want to let all of our viewers know that are on Instagram, watching us on YouTube, watching us on LinkedIn, watching us on Facebook, that Daniel has this book that he's written. Is there anything you want to plug, Daniel, before you leave?
No, man, Sean, I appreciate what you're doing, man. I know I could do some accolades or something like that myself, man, in terms of promoting something. And as I told you, I didn't even want to promote the book, man, but what you're doing and the impact that it can make into the community, man, my hat's off to you, man. And I just want to tell you just to keep doing what you're doing, man. I think there was a man on death row who said the criminal justice system is broken beyond repair. And I don't want to take it as being hopeless, because with God all things is possible. But I think, man, if it takes things like this that can break that culture and break into that culture, because that culture is so deep rooted, it almost take a backhoe to get in it, to get down to the bottom. But I said, but man, if you can continue doing what you're doing, if we can impact young people, that are young officers that are getting hired on jobs, to show them and make them think that there is another way that you can police. There's another form of policing that you can do to really help the community and not hurt the community, man. But we got to deal with the past first, of how all this stuff got started and moving forward. So I thank you again, Sean, man. I can push this out there. I'm telling you, Sean, If people hear the whole story of Alfonso, man, that man has a motion picture, his career, his life, you know, with God and what he did in law enforcement. You'll never find another officer to do what he did. Suli, his heart and passion, man. I'm telling you, man, I literally thought this pastor back home told me, he was like, man, Dan, you're one in a million. There's not too many officers that's like you. And I really thought that for a lot, that I thought that there wasn't nobody who saw the culture like I saw it until I met these two. And I know there's more out there, you know, more former and present officers that are out there, man, that has great hearts, you know, following and doing the right thing they can do. But some of them feel like they're locked and they don't know what to do. So I say, man, to any of your viewers, anybody you have, man, Sean, anything I can do to help anybody, you know, man, feel free to give my information out. And I just truly thank God for you putting this on and allowing me to come on to talk.
Thank you for those kind words, Daniel. Do you at least have a website you can share with everybody?
Not right now, Sean.
Okay.
I just started my Instagram, man. 911 to fathers.
What is it called?
911 to fathers.
911
put something out there. Yeah, trying to put something out there to.
All one word?
Yes, sir. Trying to put some stuff out there to be able to help men to understand how to be better fathers, because that's the greatest thing I learned in law enforcement, man. The impact that a father has on the home. Doesn't matter if it's rich, poor, black, white. That man in that home, man, makes a tremendous difference to what happens in future generations in that child's life.
Daniel, salute. I know you got to run. I'll be in touch with you. I want to do a one-on-one interview with you at some point in the near future. Let's make that happen. Thanks again for joining us on Cops and Convicts.
Thanks, sir. You be blessed.
You too. All right, Al, your turn to answer this question.
Well, there's obviously many things that can be done to improve the criminal justice system, but I'm going to go with.
Give me your top one for law enforcement culture, changing law enforcement culture.
Yeah, so we talked about it a little bit in the beginning. I'm going to have to focus on the authority and power imbalance. Police departments all over the United States do a great job in training and tactics and in securing certain geographical locations, at responding, at enforcing the laws. They do great based on their training in those areas, and they spend a lot of time, being one, Suli being another. We were involved in different type of SWAT type of tactical training, and you do that constantly. I mean, it's to the point to where it becomes second nature, as in you don't have to think about it. Just like Suli described very vividly in his story he shared, a lot of that came out of a reaction, out of his training. You'll hear often in a lot of different movies, let the training guide you. You know, when you're in a fearful situation, the training will get you through certain things. I would love for departments to focus training on how to handle authority and the power that they hold. It's one of those things. You're hired, you go through the background process, that you go to the academy, you're trained to be able to get out there on the streets, but really you don't know anything. You only know a bunch of knowledge, but it's the experience that's going to really get you through your day, to be able to go home safely and help keep your peers safe. But nobody really trains you on how to handle the power that you're given. It's like if you're giving this immense amount of power, and when it's not handled right, then we see a lot of the injustice that we're currently seeing and that we've seen historically. I think it's mismanagement that's coming from the not knowing what to do with that authority, that type of power. And that could hurt individual officers on a personal level, because that authority begins to then become your identity. And then when you are reliant and dependent on this authority that you think that you have, this power that is just really a perceptive type of power, it becomes your identity. And then everything else that's important to you becomes second, third, fourth, as far as priority. Maintaining that power then becomes your new image, and it begins to really format the way your brain thinks and sees others. Then you begin to see people from a level of authority. Now you're up here and everybody else is below you. If police departments were to be able to spend as much time on training in the proper use of power and authority, we wouldn't see so much of the different violent scenarios or the suicide rate that we see within law enforcement. So we know that law enforcement has a 50% or more suicide rate while active and after retirement. Think about a career of authority and power to the day that that person retires or is fired or puts down the badge. They're left with no identity because the career has shaped their minds to think that they're up here, really, like you mentioned, Sean, making themselves their own God. So when that badge is removed, then you're a God with no authority really in your own self. And then you're really left to struggle because now you're trying to figure out your your identity in many different things. And it becomes very confusing. And I believe that that's the root cause of what causes then so much suicide within our law enforcement and our military people is this untaught ability to have authority and power, but without the training, then it could easily be misused and used outside of authority. Suli mentioned it. Authority and power should really be used to lift others up. If we bring God into the perspective, the one who is all powerful never exercises any authority over us in a way that controls us or makes us do anything beyond our ability or makes us feel bad or condemns us in any way, but governs his authority through love and compassion and what's in our best interest. You would think if you could look at it, law enforcement governs power by trying to rip you away and incarcerate you or put you under some type of government control to exercise authority. It's a misuse of authority. Authority should be to make you better. And so if somebody's committing wrongs, we should ask, why is this person committing wrongs? What needs to be done to get you back on track? And with that authority that law enforcement holds, they could help get that done. So if I could change anything, I would like for there to be training on the proper use of authority and power. And so that every individual officer out there knows who they are and where their position is, who they are in their identity, so that way they would never want to go out and abuse power.
Great answer, Al. Last question that I have for both of you. The question has to do with your faith and what the law enforcement profession required you to do. And I asked this question because it was probably last year, maybe it was earlier this year. I don't even remember when we sat down, Al. You said you can't serve two masters. And at one point, you had to set aside your faith in God to be the best member of law enforcement that you could possibly be. And I want to start with you, Suli. Was there any fight that you had internally between wanting to be obedient to God and wanting to be obedient to the law enforcement profession? Did you experience that at all?
When I first I gave my life to Christ in 2017. I was still technically a police officer. So in all honesty, I didn't really feel or receive the true relationship with Christ until 17. So that I only technically been 1 year as a cop, and having the Lord in my heart. So the way I can articulate it for you, it just became more apparent for me to realize the way I was looking at policing before that, there was no way for me personally at that moment that I can truly heal and truly move on at the same time.
How are you looking at it, Suli? How are you looking at the profession that
at that time or right now?
Hang on. How are you looking at the profession looking back that made you realize once you gave your life to Christ that I can't do that anymore?
Mm-hmm.
What was it about the profession that said to you, I can't do that anymore?
There was no sense of healing. There was no faith base. There was no sense of a healing process for these men and women, a true one, right? There was nothing there for them. They didn't do anything for me to truly force myself to truly find myself in regards to healing. They just wanted me back in the saddle. They just wanted to make sure I go to therapy and the therapy will work, and then you can move on. It felt like they were CYA. It felt like it was an administration, just making sure they were clear before I did anything else. And there's more to the story that occurred in between. So when I look back now, and excuse my wife, she's cooking right now.
No worries.
There was no sense of relationship with my family. They didn't reach out to my wife. They didn't reach out to my children. There was no sense of that. It was just work. Are you okay? Now let's get back to work. That didn't work with me, especially when I gave my life to Christ, because there's no way I could do two things at the same time like that. You want all me of that, and then I'm healing truly with Christ now, with God, with these practices, with the Word. There's no way I could do it at the same time at that moment. And looking back now, it could be done. It could be done, but it needs to be introduced to it. But at that time, it was not there. So that's why I left in 2018. I chose my family first. I chose Christ, I chose God, and it led to me choosing my wife and my children. By the way, I am in love with my wife right now. I am in love with her more than anything when I was a cop. I think I'm scoring some points with her right now, but truly, and I'm still in love with her to this day. And my boys, my men, they would have never been who they were today if I was a police officer. No, I would have been, the time it took for me to get in there and grind it out would have never worked out. So that's the best way I can answer your question right now, Sean. I think that's a question should be ongoing for myself, but that's why I continue to give back. That's why at the same department right now, I'm in the process of being a chaplain for them, because I still help those officers to this day. And I want to share with them the good news, right? As being a police officer, that's my goal right now. So I'm still ongoing answering that question, Sean.
Thank you, Suli. Al, what did the profession provide you, or what did the profession require of you that was in direct conflict with your relationship with Christ? What did the profession require?
What sticks out to me the most, I mean, what is just ringing off the top of my head is the ability to articulate words that sounds right on the outside, but really with the root of manipulation. I'll explain that a little more. So any action, and more enforcement related action, any contact with people that I would have on the streets in my official capacity to justify whatever I wanted to do, whatever my goal was, then I would just need to articulate that in a way that justified my behavior. As long as I could say it the right way, in line with legal standards, and as long as it sounds like good ethical things and it goes for the greater good, then I could get away with mostly anything. I called it the art of articulation, but it's really manipulation. So if my goal is to disrupt a criminal organization, how I get into them doesn't matter. I could manipulate every part of it as long as I could articulate that it was in line with legal processes. I could lie, I could cheat, I could maneuver the environment to where I could have people then show up to then do what I wanted, basically what I wanted to do, all from the background, and be fully legally justified. So when I think about it now, I'm fully submitted, or I'm fully committed to my faith, but I would never try to manipulate somebody into doing it, even as much as I would love to see people that I care for, or just somebody that I think might benefit from knowing the Lord. I can't even imagine trying to manipulate them into it. So if enforcing the law is good, then why does it take me manipulating them? It's hard for me to live with now. I go back and think about some of the great cases and some of the great accolades and some of the high achievements in my career. I think about what it took me to get to that. And I can't think of one scenario where it doesn't have some form of foundation based on lies, but lies that are fully legally justified. As in, I could testify to those lies in court and be fully justified. I cannot do that in this day. I think it may have been Suli or Daniel asked me, we asked each other the other day, would you go back if you could right now? And I said, I miss the excitement. I mean, the adrenaline. I built a capacity in my brain for adrenaline and excitement. That's why it's kind of hard for us to live normal lives after law enforcement, because we've experienced adrenaline, the highest levels that you could go. And it's kind of hard to find things in this normal lifestyle that don't meet what we're used to. I also feel that contributes to some suicide and some hardships on law enforcement officers. But I can't see myself going back now, because if I can't do it successfully, effectively, without lying and manipulating the scenarios, the scene, by kind of instigating things to make things happen according to my goals. And so it's one of those things. I would not be able to go back now with my faith and continue to lie in such a way, even though it's justified according to our standards in our culture now. It's justified. Everything. I didn't do anything illegal, but it was unethical and it was against God's word. And so I wouldn't be able to go down and do it comfortably. So when I mentioned before, I had to leave God at home when I would go to work. I would get up in the morning excited to go do my thing, but sorry, Lord, I'll see you as soon as I get back. When I get back, I'll repent, or I'll ask for forgiveness, but I got to go to work. I got to go do these things. And so when it really came down to it, am I really doing good things? And now in my own reflection, I have to answer, I would never want to go back.
Are you saying that if you're in law enforcement enough, it's kind of like politics. We're talking government.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say with confidence that you can't stay in this profession for any extended period of time without experiencing something unethical that you saw or you committed inside of law enforcement? I'm asking the question. You're both nodding yes.
I'll answer this one from my standpoint. If I was to go back today, which I would love to, actually, but I do know I'm going to run into some stuff. And a lot of that is not so much, what we see in the streets. It's actually what you're going to see within the department. Mm-hmm. You're going to start to see a lot of betrayal. You're going to start to see a lot of, that Machiavellian stuff going on. Mm-hmm. And because of where we're at right now with our heart, that's going to be that image that's going on that we saw, that we just turned our head to, we can't do that no more. We're going to see things, and that's why I look forward to being a chaplain at this place. I'm surprised they're even asking me to come back, because I'm going to see things, Sean, that no one ever talked about, but needs to be talked about. Right. So with confidence, I definitely feel if I was to go back, if they Suli, no choice, put on a belt, you're going back right now, there's going to be a handful of things I'm going to see, but that's not going to be so much the street, right? It's going to be the way we respond to things, the way we respond to each other, you know, and in reality, that's part of the issue that's going on right now. We're responding in a cookie cutter way, you know. So
I would say that if I happen to go back, I wouldn't be able to be as effective as what they were looking for. As in,
so true.
I could help a lot of people as now I'm dedicated really to just giving myself in betterment of others. And if I did that in policing, I don't feel that my superiors would be happy with that. They would say, you've helped a lot of people. In reality, you've mitigated crime. That's true criminal justice, community policing, as mitigating crime before it ever happens. That's the direction we should focus. And that's the approach I would take. As in, if I saw somebody who is involved in wrongdoing, I would go and help them discover ways to live without that wrongdoing. Then there would be no justification for law enforcement to exist. Law enforcement doesn't want that help. I don't feel that I would be effective in what they're looking for. They would say, you saw the wrongdoer, why didn't you beat him down? And I would say, because I found him a rehab home to go, and now he may no longer need to commit robberies or theft or go to do all these things and continue to contribute to mass incarceration. They would say, but that's what we're here for. Our job, we're paid to arrest and to incarcerate. That's how our economy continues to function within law enforcement. So I wouldn't be that effective in there. And so not being able to do something wholeheartedly, I just wouldn't, I would no longer ever take the risk of leaving God at home, since now that's the center of my existence.
It's a fantastic answer. Guys, I want to thank you. I want to thank you both for taking the time to share your stories. To share your stories. And I don't want to call them stories. Share your experiences with our viewers. Anything either one of you want to plug before we bounce?
Well, you know what? Thank you, Sean, for what you're doing. I'll be honest with you, man. I'm not really into these platforms. I'm not really into these groups that talk about community and cops. I'm just not. I'm more of a one-on-one. But man, I like what you're doing, Sean. I can feel in your voice. I can feel the courage in your heart. So you continue to do what you're doing, man. Yeah. And I have no platform myself.
I appreciate
My
it.
platform is him. So we're good.
I'll just the last few words I had to say.
Anything you want to?
Yeah, being that this show is called Cops and Cons, I would have to say that we are here. That's the purpose of us coming together for this. Cops, cons. We don't see you as nobody as different. We're all people who go through challenges in life, and we're all trying to find our way. Suli and I just happened to find it through Jesus Christ. He saved us and redeemed us, justified us, and so now we're just basically sharing the new life that we have in Him. So we're not haters of police or haters of cons. We actually love both populations, and so we just want to see the best for both of those populations to thrive, and so that's why we share.
Amen.
Fellas, thank you. And for those of you who are watching and want to check this out after we've clipped it up and put it on different platforms and social media, the recording, you can check it out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time to come on the Cops and Convicts podcast, and we'll get back at you.